All right, let's jump right into this explainer. When we think about warfare and global defense, we usually picture heavy machinery, advanced tech, and massive armies. But today, we're zooming in on a completely different kind of enemy. We're looking at the massive global threat of tiny bugs and how humanity, from industrialized military complexes all the way to indigenous forest communities, fights back.
To really grasp the scale of this, you have to hear this shocking statistic. 1 out of every 17 people worldwide dies from malaria. 1 in 17. It's a staggering number, and it absolutely proves that the most devastating enemies to human survival are often the absolute smallest. We aren't just talking about a backyard annoyance here. We're talking about a deadly adversary that has historically decimated entire populations and armies.
So, to understand this threat, we first need to define exactly what we're up against. In the scientific and military worlds, we're dealing with what are called vectors. A vector is an arthropod. Think mosquitoes, ticks, or fleas that acts as a carrier. It basically transports a disease-causing organism, or a pathogen, from one host directly to another. They are the living delivery mechanisms for some of the world's most dangerous diseases.
Here is our strategic briefing for today. We'll start with the ultimate tiny threat. Then meet the vectors, cover their tactics of transmission, dive into the military defense system, and finally explore nature's botanical arsenal.
Step 1. Meet the vectors. Let's identify the enemy combatants.
We have to start with the mosquito, which is arguably the most important arthropod to human health and military operations globally. These bugs can single-handedly render entire military units combat ineffective. What makes them so formidable? Well, for one, they mature from a harmless egg into a lethal carrier in just 2 weeks. Sure, they only live for about a month, but in that short time they transmit war-stopping diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and yellow fever. Back in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, mosquitoes alone literally took entire units out of the fight.
Next up in our lineup is the flea. And don't let their microscopic size fool you. They are incredibly persistent and truly painful biters. But what's really terrifying about the flea is its lifespan. Unlike the mosquito, an adult flea can survive and terrorize populations for up to an entire year. They are highly efficient vectors, and they're notoriously famous for carrying the bubonic plague.
Finally, we have the tick. Now, ticks are considered one of the most horrifyingly efficient vectors on the planet. Why? Because a female tick can actually pass a disease-causing pathogen directly into our eggs. That means when the baby tick, the larva, hatches, it's already infected. It is entirely capable of passing on a disease the very moment it takes its first meal. It is quite literally a biological weapon right out of the gate.
Moving on to tactics of transmission. Let's look at exactly how the enemy strikes.
There's a really important distinction in how these diseases actually spread, breaking down into 2 main tactics. Passive transmission is basically a dirty taxi service. Imagine a fly lands on waste, gets bacteria on its feet, and then lands on your food. The pathogen just goes along for the ride. But active or biological transmission, that is much worse. This is where the bug acts as a biological incubator. The disease actually multiplies and develops into an infectious form inside the vector's body before it strikes you.
And honestly, active transmission gets incredibly visceral. It is not just a simple bite. Take the flea transmitting the bubonic plague. The plague bacteria multiplies so rapidly inside the flea that it actually blocks its gut, almost like a stopped-up drain. So when the starving flea tries to feed on a human, it can't swallow the blood, and it ends up regurgitating, vomiting the deadly bacteria directly into the host's bite wound. Other bugs like the kissing bug will bite you and then defecate right into the wound to spread the disease. It is just brutal biology.
These transmission tactics result in horrific, history-altering diseases. We've already mentioned malaria and dengue fever from mosquitoes and the plague from fleas. But consider epidemic typhus, which is carried by the body louse. The louse gets crushed onto the skin, and the host unknowingly rubs the pathogen right into the wound. That exact mechanism killed a staggering 150,000 soldiers during World War I when basic sanitation broke down in the trenches.
So how do we fight back? Let's examine the military defense system, chemical armor, and strict protocols.
To combat this massive global threat, the U.S. Department of Defense uses what they call the insect repellent system. It's a very strict, 3-step physical and chemical barrier. Step 1, the uniform itself is treated with a chemical called permethrin. Step 2, chemical repellents like DEET or parkeridin are applied directly to all exposed skin. And Step 3, The combat uniform must be worn properly. We're talking sleeves down, pants tucked firmly into boots. The military emphasizes that all three of these elements must be utilized simultaneously. Skip one, and your armor cracks.
The rules for maintaining that chemical armor, specifically the permethrin, are incredibly strict. Factory-treated uniforms are ideal because they save precious preparation time before deployment, and they remain effective for 25 to 50 washings. But here's the catch. One single trip to the dry cleaner will completely strip the permethrin from the fabric, totally destroying your chemical armor. On top of that, certain flame-resistant uniforms can never be treated with it at all. It's a highly controlled synthetic defense grid.
But what if you don't have access to military-grade chemicals? That brings us to nature's botanical arsenal, traditional defenses in Cameroon.
Let's contrast that heavily industrialized military approach with an entirely different, incredibly resourceful defense system. Researchers recently surveyed indigenous populations across 6 localities in Cameroon. This included areas inhabited by pygmy clans living in deeply forested, high-risk environments. Now, these communities face the exact same deadly vectors, specifically the malaria-carrying Anopheles mosquito, but they obviously don't have factory-treated combat uniforms. Instead, they rely on centuries of traditional plant knowledge and local biodiversity to protect themselves. So instead of slathering on synthetic DEET, these communities have distinct, practical ways of unleashing nature's defenses. The survey found that 50% of the time they release specific volatile compounds by burning dried plant parts, which produces a natural insect-repelling smoke inside their homes. 31.2% of the time, they mash fresh plants and apply the paste directly onto their skin as a topical barrier, and 18.8% of the time, they simply hang fresh, aromatic plants inside their living spaces to disguise human scents and drive mosquitoes away.
And this botanical resourcefulness is highly strategic. When you look at exactly which parts of the plants are used, leaves are overwhelmingly preferred, making up over half of all usage. Why is that? Well, it's likely because leaves are readily available and they contain the highest concentration of those crucial volatile essential oils. But crucially, harvesting leaves allows the community to use the repellent without actually killing the plant. It is quite literally sustainable warfare against vectors.
So what exactly are they using out there? The researchers documented several key botanical defenders. Plants like the African alemmy tree, palm flowers, and lemongrass are absolute staples. Lemongrass, for instance, contains a natural compound called citronellol, and modern science absolutely backs this up. Essential oils from these plants can be just as effective as chemical DEET at repelling mosquitoes, but without the synthetic toxicity. They are literally pulling highly active, target-specific repellents straight off the branches.
Which brings us to a really fascinating crossroads. As we face growing global issues with these bugs actually developing resistance to our laboratory insecticides, we have to ask, what's our next move? Will our ultimate long-term defense against these tiny, deadly vectors continue to be formulated in a chemical lab, or will the future of human protection be rediscovered in the sustainable botanical blueprints of the forest? It is definitely something to think about the next time you swat away a mosquito. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity sharp.